All right, welcome to you all. This is Jules Nancy, biomedical engineer from the Radboudumc Reshape Center for Innovation, and Gloria Zans with the Innovation Learning Network. We are excited to share today's Exponential Tech Tuesday with you about the workforce of the future. With the advent of exponential technologies, the way we work is evolving. And as technology become an integral part of our work life, the role of humans is changing. And our speakers today will give us a tour of what we can expect in that future workspace in healthcare. But first, a few housekeeping items. You have been muted upon entry to avoid background noise and disruptions. If you are joining us by phone only and wish to chime in during Q&A, please press *6 to take yourself off mute. Hold off on Q&A until the end, or however, feel free to use the chat box during the presentation for questions and comments. And make sure that you select everyone from the drop-down menu. This presentation is a contribution to the ILN and the GNIC, which means that you can live tweet throughout. We will drop the session's social media handles and hashtags in the chat box shortly. Please note, today's session has an optional 30-minute Q&A that follows at the end of the normal programming. We invite everyone to remain on the call after the top of the hour for a conversation with our panelists. And now I'd like to introduce those panelists to you. We have Nancy Giordano. She's a strategy futurist and founder at Playbig Inc., helping to navigate change in this fast-moving, dramatically shifting future. We have Dr. Tim Antonius. He's a neonatologist at the Radboud University Medical Center, and he's an augmented reality innovator. And we have Andrea Thomaz, who is the co-founder and CEO of Diligent Robotics, Inc., a human-centered robotics company. And with that, I'd like to give the floor to Nancy. The floor is yours.
Hello. Hi. Excitingly, actually, Andrea and I are both in Austin. So we have Texas well represented in the house today. But a pleasure to be with you all. I will only spend a few minutes trying to give a little lay of the land, because really my work is to try and prepare organizations and leaders and audiences and even the youth of tomorrow for the work that our other panelists are doing, right? So they can understand why this is so relevant and why, and how to experiment with it, how to invest in it, how to get more confident around these emerging technologies and the roles that they can play. So mine is a sort of a broader perspective. I am going to share my screen and I'm going to take you guys through a few slides. Hopefully we were laughing that our desktops are cleaned up enough to be able to make this work. So does that work? Can you all see it? So I will hopefully just take about 10 or 12 minutes to kind of go through this. This is a sort of an excerpt from a longer talk in which we talk about the different ways in which we are navigating this big shift. And sometimes it's really called to be, an audacious leader. Sometimes it's really concentrating more on a particular technology. But today I wanted to talk about how it is that we navigate what we describe as permanent ambiguity. So just sort of to start, often people use this quote about the future already exists. It just isn't evenly distributed. And I used to use this. I thought that was great. And now it's happening so much faster that I actually don't think that that's the way to look at it anymore. It's not like there's sort of somebody in the corner who's figuring it out and slowly it will roll across. And when it's been well vetted and well, proven, then we can all sort of decide to jump on board. It's happening in real time. There was work that was done by a giant aerospace company a year or two ago about workflow. And 60% of the work that team does, even for a big, huge organization like that, was dynamic and in real time. It was not planned or emergent from the plan, which was the other stats. So if almost 60% of our work is in real time, how do we, again, learn to navigate that more successfully? You look across this vast road and not show, we talk about long-term planning isn't an effective tool anymore. So way I have oriented my work as a strategist is to just simply answer these two questions. Do we have a good understanding of what the future needs and expects from us? And that's what these kinds of events are really fabulous at helping us better understand. And then can we take sort of an inventory of what we have available that we can contribute and create something unique to this future, right? We all have different curiosities, backgrounds, resources, equities, and experience that we can bring as an individual, as an industry, and actually, over and over as a member of society. So as we look to the future, these are the two ways in which I'm, again, trying to help close that gap and give people more confidence and zero in on where it is that they really want to add the most value. I invite people to look at it through three lenses, right? One is as a professional, which is usually why we come to an experience, an event like this. We want to figure out how to be able to do our work better. But we're also humans that are going through this level of change and this, amount of questioning. And we're parents and we're community members. And, there's a lot of people that we impact with our own confidence or not about the future. And then increasingly, as I mentioned, we're being asked to think about these things as a member of society. It's no longer that we can kind of be in our own little world doing our own little thing and not think about the implications from a broader perspective, both positive and negative, to be quite frank. So how do we think about this? When we think about the future, it becomes daunting, not just in scale and speed, but also scope, right? It's like so broad in terms of how we need to consider what it is we're learning and what it is that we're doing. So here's one of those stats that you kind of like, I don't even know what a quintillion is, but somehow, apparently, someone has calculated, I don't know how, that currently, as of this moment, we create 2.5 quintillion bytes of data a day, right? So it's a lot of zeros. And if you dimensionalized it, apparently that's the equivalent of 10 million Blu-ray discs, which if stacked on top of one another is 4 Eiffel Towers, right? Every day. And that's before we've got sensors embedded in our toothbrushes and in our lawn sprinklers and in our pillows and all the other like day-to-day advices that we're going to be connected and smart as we move forward. So as you've got this much information being created and this much sort of available data and available, potentially insight, how do we start to sift through that? How do we make sense of it? How do we figure out, again, the signal versus the noise, as we like to say? And it's happening so fast, right? It's not just sort of what we call linear change, it's exponential. And the difference between, regular and exponential is a great quote from Ernest Hemingway, when apparently he was asked how he lost his money. He said, slowly and then really fast. Like it was gradually and then really quickly. So it's like, it seems like nothing is happening until all of a sudden it really does sort of take off. And it is at a much faster rate than we are used to. And our bodies are used to preparing for and planning for linear change, right? We can sort of understand a certain rate of change, but when it happens in such a place that it sort of hockey sticks this quickly, it often catches us off guard. And as humans, then we become much less, I keep using the word confident, but limbically, like it literally goes into us in the sense of feeling unstable and feeling unsure and not knowing exactly how to, again, orient. So how do we manage that? Normally I go through now and talk a lot about what we call the disruption mandate, like all the technologies that are coming in and changing. And since we have not as much time together today, I just want to give one example of something that just came through at South by Southwest that my friends were involved in, that just shows the promise of what is possible when we can kind of get out of our way and start to imagine using these technologies in more interesting and exciting ways. So there's an insurance company, a supplemental insurance company in the United States called Aflac. They have given, over $150 million to cancer research, pediatric cancer, I think in particular, and, felt like that money was well used, but also felt like progress was slow. And so 2 years ago, embarked on a completely different way of using their contribution and pulled a team together to build what is called a social robot. And it launched at the end of last year at South by Southwest. It just won the People's Choice for the Innovation Award. It's one of Time Magazine's most successful new products or new introductions of technology. But the idea is that children ages roughly 3 to 13 who are diagnosed with cancer are gifted one of these, and it becomes their companion as they go through the treatment process. And it has been programmed in very sophisticated ways to be able to interact with the child, to become a place that the child is able to express their emotions, whether they're in pain or whether they're sad or frustrated or out of control or happy. The duck has a social component to it where you're walking through the hospital ward and it'll quack around another duck. And so the kids are encouraged to talk to one another and connect with one another. It mimics their heart rate. It teaches them how to slow down and to meditate. Like there's just so many things about this where it becomes a very vital part of their treatment and then hopefully lead to better rates of and faster rates of cure, and certainly doing it with less stress. So you don't have to imagine that this would just got 4 patents. It's got AI in it. It's got robotics in it. It's got an augmented reality piece to it, I think, where there's a piece we can go on the computer and play some sort of game with it. There's a lot that it does, but it's such a humanistic way of thinking about what a very, very sophisticated piece of technology can do. And we start to imagine where the future of healthcare is. It really is, to me, the integration of those. So as I sort of looked at landscape across all these different things, we built a map around all the ways in which technology is impacting our lives and changing culture and society. And we zeroed in on this one, which is the permanent state of ambiguity. So I'll just, again, go through this quickly, which is how I help companies sort of think through it, right? Because if you're in the United States, the military uses a term called VUCA, and you guys may be familiar with it, but it's really describing a state in which there's volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And you think, again, from a military perspective, how do you prepare soldiers for that? There's no handbook that everyone can use. There's no chain of command in an environment like this that makes as much sense. So how is everyone prepared to be able to respond to an environment that looks this, dynamic? In the world of business, what this often means is that we stop making decisions, right? Paralyzed is too strong a word maybe, but we certainly sit around and wait to try and figure out what the right thing is to do. Again, where should we invest money? Where should we invest training? Who do we hire and how? But in an environment where 60% of the work is dynamic, we have to keep going. So I started thinking about how do companies that are thriving manage such ambiguity? And there were a few strategies. One is the rise of design thinking, which hopefully is a concept and a place that you guys have investigated already, but I love the simple map, right? It's just a way of being human-centered in the design process in which we try and think through a problem through the actual user's experience. We build something, we prototype something, we test it, we get feedback, and we iterate, and we go faster and faster and faster around this. So it's not such that we're spending so much time in research and development and waiting to launch the zillion-dollar thing and then watching that we somehow missed the opportunity. And this is not just in products, but it's also just in the way in which we do our work, right? You can use this to innovate a hiring function or an accounting function, any kind of process function, not just the final deliverable. And in thinking through that, one of the real keys is how do you create something that has at least enough value to be able to get some, interest or to get, some feedback, but it doesn't have to be perfect. And this is this idea of the minimal viable product, which again, hopefully is a term that has become more familiar, but often people still think of an MVP as, starting with the wheel and then the axle and then the chassis and then the so-and-so, but they're really at the wheel, there's no solution yet. What you're really trying to think through, what is the minimum solution, right? A skateboard that leads to a scooter, that leads to a bike, that leads to a motorcycle, that leads to a car, that leads to a faster car. And so what we need to think through is how do we create that sort of MVP and get comfortable with that? And with healthcare, it's often really difficult, right? Because we're so used to being, the stakes are high, highly regulated, but just getting into that process of learning to build some sort of MVP for any kind of thing that we're learning to innovate helps it become a more natural part of the way in which we can recognize and jump on opportunities more quickly. The other is this idea of uncommon partnerships, which I love. So there's lots of different ways you can think about that. One, right now, Pizza Hut and Toyota are teaming up to consider offering a self-driving delivery truck, right? Which is both fun and exploits a law. Because again, the law says that if you have a driver in the car, you cannot have a working pizza oven. But if you do not have a driver in the car, you can have a working pizza oven. So suddenly I can have a hot, fresh pizza delivered to my house, which goes to another big shift, which is escalating expectations, right? Now I can have these things delivered perfectly right to my door. But I love the fact that this is sort of this unusual teaming to try and get to something that wasn't even possible before. Another is where on one level we're a competitor and the next we're a collaborator. So Honda just recently announced that they're investing almost $3 billion in technology that GM is pioneering through their company called Cruise. And GM set it up so that they can be a competitor at the retail level, but again, collaborators in this innovation level. So I think this whole mix of who is a collaborator and who's a competitor starts to blend and look really different when you start to imagine this kind of fast-paced, innovative future. It's too hard to do all these things necessarily alone. And if we can bring both of our resources and our prowess to the party, who knows what's possible. And here's my other favorite one. 10 or 11 years ago, a really interesting conference was born in Houston, Texas, because sometimes you can see that somebody else has a solution from a completely different industry and a completely different vantage point. So cardiologists and petroleum engineers came together to build the Pumps and Pipes Conference, right? Because they are both trying to figure out how to get hydraulics through a tube. And it has grown now. It has a few more other industries. There's a bit more aerospace and energy, and some others are part of it. But how fascinating, right, that they can learn from one another in what seems like such disparate industries. And I think about that a lot in terms of the work that I do. Where can we pull from over here to help better understand something over there? So when we start to think again about uncommon partnerships, it's really broad, but a really important part of building a capacity and a network for driving innovation. The other is really, I mean, it sounds so simple, but a growing appreciation for curiosity. And we can say that inside our organizations, we, want people to feel curious. This is a book actually from Brian Glazer, who is a Hollywood producer who's worked with Ron Howard. And he has committed to take someone outside of his industry for lunch every 2 weeks for 22 years. So imagine the connections he's able to make, right? Because he's cultivated what I call informed intuition. He's able to start to see connections in a way that no one else does if they haven't invested this kind of time outside of the work that they normally do. And I've been talking about this for years. And then a few months ago, the Harvard Business Review confirmed that this is a good strategy by making the business case for curiosity. What was interesting is that they interviewed middle managers to find out, how they felt about this. And overall, people were like, yeah, curiosity is great, but we really don't incentivize it around here. And the question was why? And it's like, because we don't want it to run amok. We don't want people to go crazy being, curious, which is such old thinking, right? It's exactly the opposite of what we should be doing. But it is interesting, again, how we talk about it, but we don't incentivize it inside our organizations. And incentivizing it means literally, like if someone wants to go to a conference that's outside of the sort of the norm, we often question, whether or not that makes sense to do. And the reality is they're just trying to sort of push the boundaries and meet some of the people and understand where things are emerging. So questioning whether or not we are really cultivating this, I think, is an important part of what we need to do moving forward. And then last is really a plea again for diversity. This isn't just because it's the right thing to do, it's a really, really smart thing to do. In California, they're messing around right now with potentially passing a law that you mandate that 30% of the board has to have women on it. It probably won't pass, but they really are trying to signal how important it is that we look outside of our norms and bring other people into the conversation. The companies that have women on their boards have a significantly higher rate of performance. So this isn't, again, just a feel-good thing. Like they do better, they perform better. But it means getting out of our comfort zone and inviting other people into the work and into the conversation and building, again, these interesting alliances sometimes and teams. And the more diverse, it's not just gender. It is about age, it is about background, it is about education. The more broad the thinking, the more that we can surround the problem and look for a more innovative solution and have that gut checked against biases that could often be in the work that we're creating. And biases amplified exponentially are scary. So the more, again, that we can have insight into that, the more robust, resilient, and safe the solutions are that we're building. Which is going to be summed up in this idea of an AQ. So I was at an event last year at Singularity University, and someone started talking about this, and everyone got excited about this idea of not just moving from intelligence or emotional intelligence, but really to an adaptability quotient. Being able to cultivate and build into our way of working, both individually and as teams and in organizations, the ability to adapt more quickly. And humility is part of that. Again, looking for building networks and investing in that, building in curiosity and investing in our curiosity, building more diverse teams and becoming more comfortable with that. All that is part of building and strengthening our AQ, which allows us then to reinterpret VUCA in a much more empowering way. It doesn't have to be such a daunting and scary thing. It can be about vision and understanding and collaboration and agility and building that kind of capacity. So I think with that, I will just summarize and say, what we're really learning to do is navigate versus replicate. It's one of the, I just realized I didn't change the number on there, but it's one of the strategies that I use when we talk about how to play bigger in the world. We've often built our expertise by being really, really good at what we do and having a kind of a playbook in which we got more and more efficient with it, and we're able to scale it, right? That is often had been the mandate of managers up until the 2000s when things started to shift much more quickly. And so Deloitte will say we need to build cultures of learning versus cultures of efficiency. I described as learning to be a navigator versus a replicator. That's really the work that we are now here to do. And it's important, to build this capacity. The reason my company is called Play Big, it's really an invitation to play bigger, because as Marianne Williamson will say, you're playing small does not serve the world. And as you're about to hear from the next two innovators that are going to speak, I mean, this work is really exciting. And the solutions that we can bring are really, they can change things quite dramatically. We're not doing incremental change anymore. We're doing quite transformative change. And so I invite you guys to be a part of this future. And that's it. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Nancy. That was mind-blowing. Really appreciate it.
So my work is done.
I'm still soaking this in right now. I'm just like, wow. I'm at a loss for words, but I'm going to have lots of questions for you in a little bit. So thank you so much for setting the context and giving us a glimpse of how to be more successful and how to really inspire and incentivize curiosity and how to do that. So thank you for giving us that framework. So I want to turn and hand the floor over to our clinician. And Tim, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thanks everyone for the invitation to speak to this audience. I'm a clinician, so I'm a neonatologist, but also an innovator, and there's a line in there. It's called Augmented Reality Innovator. It's flattering, but the product of the thing I will present today is indeed about augmented reality, but it's actually about a problem we have at our ward. So for everyone who's not familiar with the term neonatologist, I'm a pediatrician specializing in ICU for newborns. So a lot of my time I spend on the ICU caring for sick or very small or premature born newborns. And one of the things I do a lot is I'll be there at the delivery room when a baby is born. And most of the babies, when I'm called, we have a problem. So we have to help that baby to make that transition from in utero to the real world. And I'll start sharing my screen. Don't know if this works. Yeah. And so the first thing I always try to answer the question, what's the problem we're actually trying to solve? Because a lot of things, a lot of new technology are coming into the floor are actually not solving a problem we have. So just the last speaker told me to think big. So I just put in a new slide. And this is worldwide neonatal deaths. And this is actually the percentage, about 10% of all neonatal deaths are interpartum related, meaning they die during birth. And that's the part of the problem I want to talk about today. And this is how the numbers in some Western countries, about 10% of all births require some assistance to begin breathing. And most of the time, it's not that difficult. It's just, we don't need the technology. We just need someone who's trained and who's there and helps that baby to start breathing. But 1% requires some more extensive measures to survive. And that number is actually increasing a bit because we're treating even more premature born babies. And how do we do that? We train our workforce a lot. So I'm a neonatal resuscitation trainer for about 10, 15 years now, and I'll train a lot of different groups of people, residents, midwives, neonatologists, and we do that by well-established algorithms. So we use very simple algorithms, which are actually in Europe, they are the European Resuscitation Council devised a neonatal life support algorithm. And that algorithm is actually quite easy to follow when you see it, because it's in here, and that's a big algorithm. It's not intended to read it to everybody, but if you look, it's like a flow chart. It's if that, then that. And it's not that difficult. Is it breathing? Yes. Oh, so okay, we're happy. It's breathing, and it has a good heart rate, so keep it warm and bring it to mother. But if the baby isn't breathing, maybe you should do something. And what you should do is actually well described in this guideline. This guideline is devised by people who are experts and look at the clinical research. So this is one of the things I'll use all day, every day at the delivery room. But in a lot of years of looking at the training, I see a lot of people having difficulties in following this flowchart, in doing the right thing at the right time after when a baby is born and which needs help. So there's actually some research being done, and in about 55% there are errors in how to treat that baby. They are sometimes small, but also sometimes big. So don't give them medication to get the heart started, don't start thoracic compressions. So that's a problem, and we see it in a very high percentage. And then we know if you go to a training, you retain those skills and knowledge not that well. And some studies say you retain for about 3 months, depending on how much exposure you have. So that's also a problem. We looked at this very quick slide. We look at how to guideline adherence from doctors and nurses to that neonatal life support guideline. We saw a lot of problems. This is actually a timeline. So this is on the right. You can see how many seconds you have to get until this is in a simulated scenario. And our test group was actually much later in doing the recovery, and that was because they didn't follow the algorithm quite well. You look at their skills, so meaning all the things you have to do, they all lag behind the more experienced one who was the instructor. We know this from a lot of different research, that protocol guideline adherence is a problem. So the reasons are sometimes not that easy because it's technical. Sometimes your hospital is not equipped. Sometimes the devices don't work very well or aren't designed well. But most of the time it's behavioral because it's a really stressful situation where you're in. And then you have to follow that algorithm, and people are strange things sometimes. They, under stress, really strange things happen with teams. So what was done, we started adopting another industries like space industry, nuclear power industry, and started looking at teams and how to effectively communicate. And this is all part of the standard training now. So we do technical skill training, meaning I know how to treat this baby with what kind of medication and how to get in air, and I know how to talk to my team. But if you really look at the evidence now, if this is really making a real big difference in the performance of teams, there's some improvement, yes. But there's still a lot of work being done. So I thought maybe we could use technology to help those teams a bit more. And we looked at very old decision support tools. They are actually designed to get some cognitive load off the teams. So you don't have to think that much, you got some help from a decision support tool. There are not a lot of decision support tools in acute care these days. But there's a growing body of evidence which supports use of these EDSTs, so electronic decision support tools. And we thought maybe we can help that team a bit and start with that neonatal resuscitation because it's so straightforward. It's a very simple algorithm. And we thought maybe we can use an augmented reality platform, and we chose the HoloLens, but it isn't because of the device, it's more the platform. So we have devised an electronic decision support tool with the Microsoft HoloLens. And why is augmented reality so good for this? Because it provides you a hands-free experience. You can work with your hands and do something. It's not like you have to operate a tablet or a screen or a mouse or anything. No, you have your hands free. You have some, the information is in your field of view, so you don't have to watch at that monitor where there's always someone standing in front of that monitor. So you're always looking at the patient monitor, which is always in the wrong place. And then we thought maybe we can integrate the vital parameters, so like heart rate, oxygen saturation, and breathing, which is already being measured by our vision monitors. Maybe we can integrate them into our EDST. That's actually not being done. So we'll pick up the heart rate, saturation, oxygen saturation, and respiratory rate from the baby and put it in our EDST in real time. This is our hospital this morning. So we were preparing for 30-week pregnancy, which the baby was about to be delivered. And actually, when you look at a mouse pointer, you can see this is our patient monitor. It's a well-known patient monitor. It's traditional. This is our ventilator, and this is our non-invasive. There's a lot of tools we use to stabilize that baby. But we have to get all those information into our EDST, and then we have to use that EDST, which is running on the HoloLens, with our users. The only thing we did is we put in a very small server, which actually gathers all information from this traditional medical monitors, like the ventilator, the patient monitor. So this one gathers all information and sends it to the HoloLens. This is actually how it looks. That our tower is in here. This is a mannequin. It's not a real baby. And this is actually one of the team which is wearing the HoloLens. Reality is much less structured than the last picture, because sometimes they're really small. There are a lot of people around it. There are a lot of people doing the same things. So the environment is actually changing a lot, and it's quite difficult. So again, to that algorithm, why did I choose that one? Because it's so simple. We have a no and a yes and a no and a yes, and then we have a circle. So it's quite straightforward. We programmed the Microsoft HoloLens to provide you with some information which you gather from that tower of medical devices. So we thought maybe we can show you some in a different way how that baby is doing. So you're looking at that baby through the HoloLens, and this is actually a screenshot of the HoloLens, which is the holograms which are projected to. So when you start with that scenario, you set the expected wait. We always have to wait for that baby because it's not there yet. So we wait until it's being delivered. So we actually roughly know what the wait is. We also know the condition. So we know why we're there. So we know why it's maybe a premature born baby, maybe a baby with some congenital heart disease or anything. And the HoloLens provides you with the right endotracheal tube size and how deep you should stick that tube if you intubate the baby. Then it gives you the right dose of epinephrine and the other medication you need. These are the vital parameters which really are important. The other ones aren't important in neonatal resuscitation. So we have a heart rate, oxygen saturation, whether or not this baby is breathing, and the temperature, and the time, because the neonatal resuscitation guideline is actually timed every 30 seconds. So that's quite fast. And we have one of the major advice and then some additional advices on the time. And I know it's hard to imagine how this works, but I'll show you in a video later. These are the cues which our HoloLens is giving to the resuscitation leader. So if it doesn't detect, because the sensors are not connected yet, whether the baby is breathing, the HoloLens will ask resuscitation leader, is this baby breathing? And you can answer it with yes or no. That gives you advice in these kinds of quotes. So if you get this advice, the team should start providing insufflation breath, and a timer will count down how to do that exactly and what time. If it detects a low heart rate, it will automatically detect that, and it will start depending on where you are in the scenario, in the algorithm, and gives you some advice what to do. Maybe the video is much better to give you a good example. This is actually how this looks. These are the holograms floating above this baby. This is a mannequin, and for this video we don't use real babies because we have a lot of difficulties in getting that to the ethical commission at this stage, and also for demonstration use it's much easier to show this. So the baby's over there, and the holograms are projecting, floating above that baby. And we'll do a small video. I hope the sound is okay. We first fix the position. In every resuscitation, this is the first step. This is actually filmed from the wearer. When you look at this diagram, you can see we're now in the compression phase of that algorithm, and you can also get some extra advice, which is increase FiO2, so you give them some more oxygen, prepare an umbilical catheter, that meaning the next step will be put in some IV. And in a baby, we do that through the umbilical cord. And so it prepares the team for the next step. And in most resuscitation, that only happens when you have a very sufficient leader which can look ahead. And most teams don't do that quite well. So this is actually me on my own doing this resuscitation. In real time, we do it with 4 people, and the leader is actually using the device. Another thing it gives you some advice when you get stuck. So look at this video, compression phase, and it doesn't work. The heart rate is still low. It's actually still not breathing. It's really low heart rate for a baby.
Please tell us this has a happy ending.
It has.
Okay, then I can keep watching.
So, yeah, it always has. Every story has a happy ending. The epinephrine and flush. So a lot of, when it doesn't work, the algorithm actually doesn't provide you with a lot of extra help because you're completely at the bottom of the algorithm. And then the logic of this application comes in, and it says consider hypovolemia. So if 2 times epinephrine doesn't work, you have to consider hypovolemia, meaning maybe you should give some blood or some volume that isn't actually in the guidelines. And a lot of teams actually get stuck in these kinds of circle reasoning, and the HoloLens can help you get out of this and give you some tips of what might be the next step. And I'll, just for the sake of I'll show the happy ending. So the baby is actually increasing his heart rate. So the color is changing, heart rate is the animation changes, the saturation goes up, and also the ventilation starts, the baby starts breathing on its own. So you can stop bagging the patients and support breathing. So this is, we thought, this might be difficult to implement because we're living in a very conservative world when we're using teams in resuscitation. And it's quite difficult to get this through regulation because it's really strict. And what happens if this decision support tool makes gives you a wrong advice? So if we first try to prove whether or not the adherence to the guideline would be better if a team uses this. So we actually devised a scenario. It's a really challenging scenario where a baby is actually hypovolemic, has lost a lot of blood and has to be resuscitated. And we randomized two groups of healthcare professionals who are all pediatricians, which are actually which would have been exposed to these kinds of cases. So we tested 17 pediatricians and we got 11 controls, and we assigned a score list for 14 tasks per individual, and the score list was made out of that algorithm. And we saw, to my surprise a bit, that the EDST group was actually performing better. And they had a higher score in compared to the group working from memory alone. And there was an improvement in the adherence guidelines. They showed less errors of commission, meaning they did less things wrong, and they forgot less things. Now, the EDST, this trial showed us that in a simulated environment, the EDST showed a statistically significant improved adherence to the algorithm. And people were less likely to deviate from the algorithm. So that was my goal, because the original problem would be there was a lot of deviations from the algorithm. However, we saw some problems there. The behavioral skills was a problem because in the study, the doctor got two nurses, and the nurses noted in the group, people of the doctors wearing that HoloLens, there was a reduction in communication of the team. There was actually less situational awareness because the rest of the team wasn't seeing what the doctor was seeing. Poor communication, we know from research, has a negative effect on patient care quality, mortality, and morbidity. So this is a problem. Also, some technical problems we saw when mentioned to the limited field of view and the holograms, and that was really inconvenient. The speech recognition engine of the Microsoft HoloLens is in a noisy environment, can give some problems, and the device itself wasn't comfortable to wear yet. If we look at this was a EDST, so the electronic decision support tool with augmented reality, using a HoloLens, which showed improvement in guideline adherence, but has a major side effect, which is actually less communication. And there were some technical difficulties, which I think in the future will be easily solved. The device will get smaller, the speech recognition will get better. But that team, how to work together while one or two people are using augmented reality is a problem we're working on now. Maybe using two HoloLenses, maybe using a screen in the delivery room where tasks are being displayed. But that is still a problem. We do this in a very small team. Kishan Tsang is a resident which has done the trial. Mendel and Theo helped me with designing this, and I programmed and got the idea for this. Thank you.
Wow, Dr. Antonius, that was incredible. I'm just mind blown. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. I just wanted to let everyone know that our panelists are here and they are keeping an eye on the chat box. So if you have any questions, please feel free to drop everything into the chat box and we can get conversations going as well. And with that, I want to hand the floor over to Andrea to tell us about Moxie, which is a really cool technology. I'm not going to tell everyone what it is. I'll let you do the unveil. So.
Yeah. So, I'm Andrea Thomaz. I'm co-founder and CEO of Diligent Robotics. And our company is a relatively new startup. We're based in Austin, Texas, and we launched the company in early 2018. But this technology that we've been building has been under development for many years in academia. So I'll kind of tell you, I can share my screen and give you a little bit of an introduction to the company and what we're building, and of course show some video. All right. So yeah, we're Diligent Robotics, and we're building AI-powered robot assistants that can support teams and empower staff to enjoy the parts of their work, to spend more time on the parts of their work that they enjoy. And in this way, we really see the company as building robot assistants that are going to be powering the future workforce. And we think kind of broadly about what that means to have aspects of daily work that everybody would like to hand off to a robot. So I think, in any job, you can kind of think of like the kind of grunt work or parts of it that you'd rather not do. And we hope that there are robots out there doing those parts of jobs in the future. But the first product that we're building is Moxie, that you can see here. And Moxie is a hospital robot assistant that is supporting clinical care teams with their routine and non-patient facing tasks so that staff can have more time with patients, and that hospitals can save on staff burnout. Like I said, our technology is built on a foundation of over 10 years of research. I started off at MIT and then spent time at Georgia Tech and most recently UT Austin before starting Diligent Robotics. And some of the robots that we've built over time are kind of pictured here. But the core of our work has always been about the human-robot interaction and building a robot that can be working side by side with people and doing really useful things. So Moxie is a hospital robot assistant that does non-patient facing tasks. And Moxie is a teammate, so working seamlessly side by side with nurses. So we can, have a small enough footprint that the robot can go anywhere that people can go in the hospital. And then, one of the things that makes Moxie really different than other kind of service robots that have been put into hospitals, it has an arm. And so when you have an arm, now the robot can not just deliver things from point A to point B, from a person to a person, but you can pick things up from somewhere and deliver them somewhere else. And so this kind of autonomy allows Moxie to complete tasks end to end. And what happens when we put the robot to work in hospitals, what we find is that this allows the robot to be more proactive. So Moxie can complete tasks without needing to be specifically asked to. So one example is we have Moxie helping with room setup when we're talking about room turnover from a discharge to an admission. As soon as a room has been marked clean, then Moxie can get a notification from the electronic health record that shows that the room status has changed to clean. And then Moxie automatically gets triggered to deliver a set of the kind of 5 or 10 things that are needed for every new patient as part of the room setup. And what we started hearing from nurses towards the end of some of our pilots is, wow, I just, I don't think I ever saw Moxie doing the room setup task, but it was just done every day and I didn't have to think about it anymore. And this is one of those tasks that really shows the benefits of reducing the cognitive load of your frontline staff, because now you've taken something that used to be a pain point for that nurse and just handed it off to the robot completely, such that the frontline staff doesn't have to think about it at all. So those are the kinds of sort of really improvements that we think that Moxie can have. And we want to help hospitals attract the best caregivers and help them perform at the top of their license to achieve consistent, high quality patient care. So part of what adding a robot to the picture can help with is really having the robot's tasks and support be triggered based on evidence-based practice. So if we know things like, oh, every patient that has a central line needs to have its dressing changed once a week. Most hospitals have a particular day of the week that they do all the central line dressing changes. And so, a common request for one of the Moxie support tasks is, let's have, for every patient room that has a central line, let's make sure that the dressing kit is available at the beginning of shift on Monday. And these kinds of things are, take the burden of, running around to the supply room off of the frontline staff and help them kind of perform at the top of their license, but also help the hospital achieve kind of consistent and high quality patient care. And so some of the things that are the reason we created Moxie is, really it was growing out of research into nursing turnover and burnout. And there's some research out of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation on transforming care at the bedside that was, really finding that nurses and frontline staff could be spending like 30% of their day on, non-value added activities or not patient care. And a lot of this was leading to burnout. And in the U.S., the national turnover rate is something like 17%. And estimates are that the average hospital spends like over $6 million a year on their turnover problem in terms of recruiting, retention, and training. And it's actually the counter to that is also that about over 80% of hospitals don't even track the amount of money that they spend on the turnover problem. So we think that this could be a big problem that we can help solve and a big cost that we can help hospitals alleviate. So I'm just going to show the video here, and you can get a sense for what Moxie has been doing in some of our pilot tests across Texas. We've been pilot testing in 5 different hospitals across Texas to date. Well, we finished pilots in 3, and we have 2 more to go by the end of Q2 of 2019. But some of what Moxie's doing are just fetching and delivering supplies and getting them to the bedside. We also have a lockbox that we can put onto the robot for testing deliveries between the nursing unit and other departments, like the laboratory or getting discharge medications from pharmacy. And you'll see that we spend a lot of time thinking about how the robot can be socially appropriate as it moves about the space, getting out of the way, not running into people, using its head and its eyes to kind of indicate where it's going. One of the tasks that a couple of different hospitals asked for help with was taking soiled linens over to the soil room. We get a lot of requests from patients. So we don't enter patient rooms or do patient interactions, but incidentally, we get a lot of requests for Moxie to come and visit patients and take selfies. So there's definitely a patient satisfaction factor that we're finding in the pilots. And here's an example of the only time that Moxie does enter a patient room is when it's been marked clean and we're dropping off admission supplies. But a lot of what allows Moxie to be self-sufficient is the arm and the gripper, where Moxie can reach in, and we have AI, an AI stack that's really focused on interactive machine learning and social intelligence that allows the robot to adapt to a given environment and have the specific skill sets that are going to provide a lot of value in that hospital. So I think that, I don't know, Gloria, how we are on time, but I can stop there and we could kind of go to discussion.
Yeah, your timing is perfect, Andrea. I really appreciate that. And that's a fantastic overview of Moxie. We're getting lots of chatter here. So for those of you that are able to stay past the hour for a bit, we'd love to invite you to our Q&A time with our panelists. So at this point, for those of you that want to chime in, please do so. If you're on the shy side and you prefer to drop your questions into the chat box, please go ahead and do so, and I can read your questions out. So I do have a couple of questions. So I'm just going to run down the list here. Nancy, so I do have a question. First question for you. So it looks like you have an amazing future crystal ball. I know it's not just a crystal ball, but I'm just curious. When you look into it, you talked about unusual partnerships, right? So what is an unusual partnership that you anticipate, or you think that's on the horizon? We just haven't quite seen it come to fruition yet.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm totally putting you on the spot, so it's okay if you say.
I'm like, I guess I don't know that there's one that I would have never anticipated Pizza Hut and right. So I don't know that I know enough. I guess the question is, do I have a dream one that I think these two could unite? And I haven't thought about that. So I am stumped without a good answer. So I'm modeling the behavior of an AQ person, which says, I don't know. And I'm okay.
I love it. That's totally.
I will think about it. Actually, I think it's a really, really great question. I'll be able to look out for it.
Perfect. And then for all the speakers, again, thank you so much for sharing and imparting your wisdom with us this morning. So a question is, for those of us that are on the phone that are looking at, thinking about the future and what does work, look like for us? What is one piece of advice that you want to share with the attendees? If there's only one thing they walk away with today, what would that be?
That one I have an answer to. All right.
Perfect. Let's start with you.
I did a couple of panels at South by Southwest that were around this topic, but just expressed very differently. But I really do think holding a positive narrative of the future versus a scary narrative of the future. I think a lot about that with youth. We did a whole career fair for the future for kids when they were college and high school students during South by. So they could start to feel that same optimism that others do when they come here and they get to see all these great panelists and innovators and technologists talk about their work. Because I think often we talk a lot about the scary sides of the future and the parts that we're frustrated and fearful of. And we don't spend a lot of time thinking about what we're really excited about and inspired by. Regarding and to get about that, we did a whole panel on science fiction and how it impacts our both individual and societal narratives of the future and give us confidence to go towards something or not. And there's a big question right now in the artificial intelligence community about whether or not we're almost too scared to be able to harness some of the really powerful advances that it could bring in healthcare and predicting earthquakes and whoever knows what else it could do because we're so afraid of the downside. So I do think we should be aware of and thoughtful and healthy skepticism, but I think we should also ensure that we think about the positive applications and implications of the future and spread that wide to the world around us.
Perfect. I love that.
I would follow up on that actually and say that specifically for robotics, I think there's a lot of skepticism and fear in society about, are robots going to be taking over jobs? Or are robots going to be taking jobs? We get, as a roboticist for the last 15 years, I think that's a question that I get often. It's like, are these robots going to be taking over people's jobs? And I think that it's a really interesting time for us to really say, first off, the answer is absolutely. There's no robot that can actually take a job today, and it's going to be a very, very long time before robots are able to do someone's entire job that is out there today. But I think there are lots of opportunities for changing work for people, like changing jobs and adding automation such that people are kind of more empowered to do the human and creative and intuitive aspects of their job, and the routine and mundane things can be given to robots. So I think that this notion of it being one or the other, like it's either automation and AI or it's a human job, is kind of a false narrative, and that we need to be thinking about the collaboration between humans and robots and AI and how that's going to be driving society and all of the workforce forward.
Well, and then I'll just build on that again and say part of this whole question again is about building scaffolding around this, right? So people can be skilled, because it's not so much about is it one or the other. To Andrea's point, it is a convergence or an augmentation of one, but there is a skilling that we do believe people are going to need, and there's going to be investing in that. So I think that rather than thinking about how do we protect what we currently have, it's how do we evolve it and build all the other societal pieces of it that we need in order to hold people well in this evolving future. Because I think, again, that's a piece of the puzzle that's often missing from the whole discussion.
What helps me, what helps me a lot is to focus on a real problem. So if you solve a real problem, then people are much more inclined to trust that technology. If you help them. So if they have a problem, there's a real problem in your clinic, and if you use technology to solve that real problem, you have an inclination to use that technology. That helps a lot.
Yours is a bit more in the life and death world. I think often what we find in the sort of business side of it is that people still will sort of subconsciously sabotage something if they feel like they can't participate in it, if they don't know how it's going to impact them. One of the other panels I did at South by is how artificial intelligence will change organizational structures. And we talk a lot about having to break down silos, but also really communicating for folks how this will change their work. Right. And if it does eliminate some portion of it, then how they will be reskilled or how they will be employed differently. What's interesting is we did work with an artificial intelligence application years ago. What we found is actually when Excel came in, it made the job way more efficient in that domain than a robot ever would. Right. Yeah. Excel made it the work of like 10 people be one person's work. So we have had some sort of processing improvements around our work for decades, but we didn't call it AI and we didn't call it robotics. So the fact that those labels get put on and scare people, as opposed to that we just continue to move to more efficient models and hopefully more humane ways of integrating this into our work, is probably the better way of holding that story. And you're right. I do think the more we can make it tangible for people, you're right.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that each of you touch on the importance of the human component, right? So it's all about keeping the human and keeping it's augmenting. You're not talking about necessarily replacing it. And I think that's where we often get, that's the fear. The scary side is, oh my gosh, I'm going to be out of a job, or it's going to replace me in some way. Or we're saying, no. This is going to make it so it's easier. You're able to have more time.
It is, but we need to look at the systems level because, again, in Sweden, people aren't worried about robotics because we protect the worker, not the job. So they're like, bring it on. The more that you can do it that make our lives easier, cool, because they feel safe inside a system, right? We have put so much economic and social value on whether or not you are doing, expending energy for paid work by somebody else called a job. Our insurance is tied to that. So much of our livelihood is tied to that. And so when we start to feel that under threat, it would make sense that we then get scared. So I go back to the biggest version of that picture and say, how do we release that so that people can feel more secure in a system that brings these technologies in? Because again, we make people feel like they're somehow not accommodating enough and they're in a system that doesn't hold them well enough.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Very good point. So I want to be mindful of the panelists' time. I appreciate you spending the time this morning with us. So I want to give maybe one or two more questions for anyone on the phone or that's dying to speak.
I can take one, and then unfortunately I need to run. I've got someone knocking on my door in 5 minutes.
No problem. Do we have anyone that wants to unmute and jump in? Otherwise, I have a couple more questions, and then I will let all of you go. Okay, so Dr. Antonius, I have a quick question for you. What is next? Where do you see, this amazing platform that you have built, going to? I mean, I know right now it's for training and simulation. I'm wondering, do you ever see this being used in a real life intensive care unit scenario, birthing scenario?
Yeah, I think we have to look at that team problem because I think this can help because it gives you some clues on what's the next step and think ahead. And the most difficult things to do in a stressful situation is think ahead. Just take a step back and think ahead. So this can help you to think ahead. But as long as you don't get that team involved, like in the current product, that won't happen. So what I'm eager to experiment with is, okay, the team leader sees that the next step will be a shot of epinephrine. So the nurse, which is wearing the other augmented reality, already gets that message. You don't have to communicate that anymore. That message is already there for the nurse, and maybe somewhat more detailed on how to draw that, how to give that epinephrine. So see augmented reality for every team member in a different way. That will be the next step. Whether or not it will be used, if I ask the people who are participating in our study, most of the younger people were actually quite happy with this. The senior people actually senior neonatologists got not scared, but they were really, didn't trust it. It was kind of bulky. I want to make my own decisions. And if you look at the residents, they actually were quite happy in listening to that. So we also,
and I think part of it is also that there's younger or more gamers, and so that technology becomes much more fluid. Right? When you put on a HoloLens thing, you start to imagine how you're navigating it, whether your voice or whether you're doing your fingers. There's just something they're much more comfortable interacting with a piece of hardware.
Yeah, we see that it was really striking, that difference. And also the interfacing works. So,
but even when I put on multiple VR goggles or experiences or whatever, and my kids have to spend 5 minutes helping me understand how to use the controller, because for me, I'm like, what? Because I don't game all day long. Right. And for them, it's so intuitive and so easy. And to your point about the social, I was also invited this past week to do a really funky VR game, long story, with this whole thing called HoloGate. But I got to do it with my daughter. And although we both had on VR goggles, there was a sound system that connected it so that while we were playing a game, we got to talk to each other the whole time. It felt completely different than doing it alone. So they've got this big, huge setup now that they're selling to family entertainment centers so that you can VR together. The idea is not to VR separately, right? So I think these are the things you have to remember, is that we're still social people who still want to connect, and to your point, share information in a highly critical environment. And it's great that we're getting more and more experience. But what you did is an MVP that we got to learn from, right? And you get to go build the next version of it. So I think it's exciting to watch it start to build.
And we see the same thing with the nursing students versus longtime nurses in the hospital pilots that we're seeing. It's, the nurses that have like 40 years of ingrained workflow are like, I can't remember that Moxie is bringing me things, versus the baby nurses, they call them, are like, what do you mean everything's just right outside the door? That's amazing.
There you go. I unfortunately do need to run, but I really appreciate being able to see these examples, because when I give these talks or I do this work around the world, the more that people can see that it's really happening, and they can see it in settings that are natural and normal and not just in sci-fi, are hugely helpful. So I'm appreciative of that you put us all together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone, for being with us today. I really appreciate you joining us this morning. If there are conversations or follow-up questions, can we direct them to contact you via social media? Or, of course, you can always reach out to myself, Gloria Zayans, Jules, or to Cynthia Bazan for contact information of the speakers, and we'll be happy to pass them along to you. And with that, I'm going to hand the session back to Cynthia and Andrea. I think we're going to have people starting to look for those selfie photos of Moxie.
I can totally see that. I can
We had to start taking Moxie out on laps around the unit that were like specifically for photos, because the robot was getting stopped in the middle of tasks too much. I was like, don't worry, she'll be out on a social lap pretty soon.
Great. That is so awesome. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning. And Cynthia, if you're still with us, we'd love to hand it over to wrap us up for the call.
Great. Thanks, Gloria. As a reminder, today's session was recorded. The session recording can be viewed on iln.org later today. Our next session is scheduled for Thursday, April 4th. Virtual Thursday is back with Project Joy, redesigning the experience of pregnancy care. Have a wonderful Tuesday, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.